continue the model we learned last week. So as you see from the shared slide, the title is now changed into 3 to 4 sector model. So we're going to add one additional, the government and external sector, but external sector we'll talk briefly. So the main question today is still the same. How much an economy produce output? How much output an economy produce? We still have the same question. Last week we talked about this when we just have household and firms. So aggregate expenditure was equal to C plus I. Now when we have government, how these conditions will change? That will be the main question of today. So these are the things we're going to do today, right? So still pay attention to the question. We still have the same question to the last week. How does the equilibrium condition change in 3 to 4 sectors? How much output should be produced to satisfy the expenditure requirement in the economy? So the last week, 2-sector model, household consume, investment purchase. So the economy should produce certain amount to satisfy those requirements. Now today we have an additional agent to the economy, which is called government. So when we include the government, the model name changes into 3-sector model. The thing you have to pay attention to is that, okay, now we have a government, which means that government will purchase goods and services as well, right? So you can easily guess, right? As a result of this, aggregate expenditure likely to increase because C plus I plus G, right? But at the same time, you have to consider this. Tax. There was no government. People don't need to pay tax. But as soon as they have government, there's government, people have to pay tax. Right. So the main concern is how much this tax likely to change aggregate expenditure. So paying tax, easy to understand. Paying tax, which means household pay tax after they earn certain income. So the amount of consumption must decrease because of this tax. Firms, same. After they creating revenue, they have to pay tax to the government. As a result, the amount of investment will decrease. So this taxation have such a characteristic. And there's 2 types of tax. Lump sum doesn't change, constant amount of tax. And proportional tax means when you have a higher income, you're supposed to pay more tax. It's called proportional tax. So we're going to include these 2 tax considering the household consumption changes. And then, of course, we have, some more details about multiplier effect. So expenditure multiplier and tax multiplier. And based on this, when the government do the fiscal policy, which one is more effective? We're going to consider that. Right, so this is about 3-sector model. And after we finish this, we're going to talk about the budget balance and the business cycle, how the government budget balance would be affected by business cycle or fiscal policy. So this is a bit separate topic, but related to the behavior of the government. So these 2 are the key things what we will do today. Okay, so as usual, now let's move to the paper screen. Okay, so I will stop sharing this PowerPoint slide. Okay, right. So as we said, hang on. Okay. All right, as we said, okay. So today we still have the same question about the equilibrium condition. And the equilibrium happens when output equal to expenditure. Last week, we talked about two sectors composed of household consumption and firms investment. So this economy should produce certain amount of output required by two sectors. Now we're going to add one additional sector here. So today we still have same equilibrium condition, but we have three sectors. So instead of CI, we have additional components like this. So even though we just use one identity, y equal to c plus I plus g, you must understand the meaning of this, right? C represent household consumption. I represent investment purchased by the firms, and G purchased by the government, right? Government expenditure. So please remember the meaning of these whole characteristics. And as I just said before, right? Now we have G. So you can guess, okay? Now we have additional G, which means that aggregate expenditure 3 compared to aggregate expenditure 2 must increase, right? Because we have additional G here. So the straight answer is like this. Yeah. AE3 greater than AE2 because we have additional G. But be careful. Sometimes this may be the case. This is not the case. Because, as I said, this government does two things. One thing, it purchases. But at the same time, what does it do? Collects. What? Tax. So we said, okay, we had an additional purchase. Yeah, this one likely to increase aggregate expenditure. But when the government collect tax, what happened then? To answer this, pay attention to this. We just ignore about impact on firms because it's same to the household. So we're going to focus on the impact on the household. Household, they consume this amount when they had income last week and left over was saving, right? But this week, this one is no longer true because when household has income, they must pay tax. And then now they can consume or save, right? So my question was, okay, when we have additional government, it purchases, aggregate expenditure increases, positive impact. But when it collects taxes from household, you see that the amount of C must decrease because of tax payment. So government has dual side. One side, increase aggregate expenditure by purchasing more. At the same time, decrease aggregate expenditure by collecting tax. So whether AE3 is always greater than AE2 depends on the amount of these two. If the government collects too much tax compared to its purchase, then we cannot guarantee whether this happens, right? Because household consumption, firms' investment will decrease a lot. But if government spends, purchases more than what it collects, then aggregate expenditure is likely to increase compared to two-sector aggregate expenditure. So when this happens, according to this equilibrium condition, automatically tells that Y3, should be greater than Y2. Okay. So in the sense we say that even if we have government, it doesn't damage or it doesn't decrease household consumption from the investment too much. Output still increase, so there will be economic growth. If the government collect too much compared to its spends, then we can say that Y2, Y3 is not always greater than Y2. So we cannot clearly say that this economy likely to grow or remain the same. So it depends on these two effects. So please remember, this is the key of today. The rest of the today's learning is all composed of the graphics, graphs, and numerical equations. But we all talk about this. The contents, we are all about this. Say again, we know that three-sector model, we have an additional sector, which is the government. So the government has two functions. It purchases, but also collects tax. So our question is, when we have government in addition, whether this aggregate expenditure would increase, remain same, or decrease. It has the same question, whether the output of this economy increase, remains the same, or decrease, because equilibrium condition that tells that output should equal to the expenditure in the economy. So if when we have government here, aggregate expenditure increases, output also increases. If aggregate expenditure decreases, output also decreases. And how can we guess or measure whether this aggregate expenditure would increase, decrease, remains the same? It depends on the individual size of these two facts. Of course, we have to consider multiply effect. We're going to learn soon. But basically, it's like that. Government do purchase, which means aggregate expenditure increases, positive impact upon aggregate expenditure. But at the same time, where is that money from of purchasing? Collect the tax from households and firms. So the collecting tax always reduce this household consumption and firm investment. So this is the negative impact on aggregate expenditure. So after we considering this both, one is positive, the other is negative, we can tell whether the aggregate expenditure is greater, remains same, or decrease. In most cases, the aggregate expenditure likely to increase. But idea is like that, okay? Any question? So shall we begin with a very brief example that continued to what we did last week? So let's have imaginary economy. Say in this economy composed of C, I, now G, like this. So we can define household consumption in this way. And firms investment 100. And let's say that government spend 100 and paying tax 10. And tax rate is 0.1, like this. Okay. So we have a lot to explain from here. Now we have got, so the additional component you can see from here is government, right? Tax, additional tax. So let's think, what are they? Okay, so G represent purchases, what we just mentioned, purchases. And what is this T10? This one, we use the word lump sum tax. So tax, fixed amount of tax, called lump sum tax, fixed amount of tax. Whatever the level of income, each household supposed to pay certain amount of tax if you are alive, right? So that is the T. And we have small t now, low character t, 0.1. This one we call proportional tax rate. So this is the tax rate, marginal tax rate, or you can say the proportional tax rate. The reason why I use the adjective proportional is because the tax rate would imposed in this way. So T multiplied by income. So higher the income, the more amount of tax should be paid. That's what we call proportional tax, right? And government spending remains the same. Example of lump sum tax. I don't get. For example, if I understand your question correctly, yeah, lump sum tax is like that. For example, there's a variety of households in the economy, and their income changes from, say, 10 million to 10 billion, for example. Now, this lump sum tax is that lump sum tax is applied in this way. Any household which has positive income supposed to pay fixed amount of tax. Fixed amount of tax. Yeah. So that is an example of the lump sum tax. Like Tuk answered, I don't know what they're going to include in that item like national defense or whatever. I don't know what they include in, but each country, they have their own tax rate. So if you have very low income, most of countries, they say that if you have very low income, you are not likely to pay any tax. It's called exemption. Exemption, right? Exemption. But as soon as you have a certain amount of income, you're supposed to pay at the beginning, certain amount, and then plus some additional amount. Okay. So that is an example of lump sum tax. Transfer is not a tax. Transfer is not a tax. The government pays to the household. So household will have additional income. Consumption tax is not a lump sum tax, it's proportional tax. because consumption tax, exercise tax, you don't pay as if you don't purchase any goods and services, right? That is a proportional tax because exercise tax or VAT, usually they have 10% of the price you purchased. So this is an additional proportional tax. Okay. Right, done about tax? Okay, let's move on then. How does household consumption change because of this tax? Pay attention to the letter we used. We used just Y in the two-sector model when there's no government. Now today, we have to change this one into YD. YD. And this D represents disposable. So disposable income is defined in this way. Y minus T, like this. So T represents tax. And depending on the tax system of a nation, this T can be composed of fixed amount or only amount of proportional, but in many cases, they have a combination of between these two. Right? So this is disposable income. And we just assume that investment is not affected. Actually, investment would be affected, but we don't consider. We just focus on impact on the household. Right. Any other question up to here? Okay, so what I will do, I will calculate equilibrium output from two sector first, and then three sector. So let's check how this equilibrium changes. Right, so we still use the same information to calculate, so please follow the calculation I do. So at first, let's talk about equilibrium in the two sector. So this is C and I equal to 80 plus 0.y. I just use y instead of yd, 100 equal to 180 plus 0.9 y. This is aggregate expenditure in the two-sector model. Pay attention to here because we're going to use this information. This is the slope, right? Slope of the aggregate expenditure in the two-sector, 0.9. Now equilibrium happens when output equal to expenditure. So y equal to 180 plus 0.9 y. So now we have equilibrium output in the two sector, 1,800, right? Okay, so this is not a big deal. So you can just follow the steps. Our main concern is what happened in the three sector, right? So let's check whether this one would increase or decrease. So three sector model. Now we have CI and G. But the calculation is not straightforward like as we write here. We still have same CI, but now we turn into YD, this one. So C was 80 plus 0.9 YD plus investment 100. Now we have to add G. How much was G? G was 100, right? And tax 10, tax rate 1%, 10%. So we're going to add this information here. G 100. Okay, so this is the C. This is I. This is G. right? It hasn't finished because of this disposable income. Now, how can we deal with disposable income? Before that, we make this amount all together 280 plus 0.9. And we define disposable income in this way. How? Yeah, y minus t. Y minus t. So you put y minus t like this instead of yd. So this is the disposable income. It hasn't finished yet because we have to consider what types of tax system this country have. So in our example, this country has both lump sum tax and proportional tax. So it will be look like this. National income minus lump sum tax 10, proportional tax like this. Okay. Right, this tax composed of two parts, lump sum, proportional. So we just have y left. So we can find out what is the amount of y now. Okay, so from this, continue the calculation. Continue the calculation in this way. Okay, so following that, 280 plus 0.9, 0.9 again, y minus 10. Okay, so 280 minus 9 plus 0.81 y like this. So 200 and how much is that? 71 minus, sorry, plus 0.8 y. Sorry. Let's ignore this one because we want to have some better calculation. Okay. So this is aggregate expenditure, 3 sector. How much was aggregate expenditure in the 2 sector? It was here. So I told you we have to pay attention to the slope. Now what's the slope? This is the slope, right? So there's changes in slope in aggregate expenditure. Also changes in intercept, right? So we will consider about the meaning of this soon. What's the meaning of changes in intercept and the meaning of changes in slope? So now let's check. Let's check the equilibrium condition. So 3 sector model equilibrium condition happen under this condition. Now we have, this is AE3, so y equal to 271 plus 0. Y, so 2.y equal to 270. So equilibrium in the 3 sector is now, let's see how much is it. Okay, 271 divided by 0.2. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, 1,355, right? So this is the new equilibrium. So shall we compare this one and the previous one? We said that in the 2 sector model, equilibrium was 1,800. Now in the 3 sector model, equilibrium is 1,355. So you can say that based on this system, even if we have additional government, actually the national output hasn't increased. it decreased. So it probably because government expenditure is too small compared to the tax it collects, right? So I just gave you an example, right? Example. Under what condition in the three-sector model, equilibrium is not always increased. Okay. So let's check now. The important thing we have to do is this. Okay. Is this. Meaning of changes in intercept and changes in slope. Like this. Okay. If you don't follow this calculation, it's still okay. Still okay. What you have to remember is when we have additional government spending or government in our calculation, the equilibrium condition depends on positive impact and negative impact. That one you should remember. Okay. And now I will show you how these equilibrium conditions can be described using a graph which we studied. Okay, so if you put it 81, then how much the equilibrium will be? Okay. So, well, as I said, the calculation is an example. So whether you keep this 0.01 or you just ignore it, is not a big deal in this case. But anyway, thank you for the calculation took. And as Tuk said, if you look at his chat, the equilibrium output, yeah, is increased nearly by 80, right? 70. So as he said, this is not a small amount, right? So we will see why this small amount of slope in the aggregate expenditure has such a big influence on the national output. We will explain the concept of the multiplier effect. Okay, so please wait for a while. And before we moving to the multiplier effect side, I will show you using the graph what's happening from the 2-sector to 3 sectors. Okay, and where was the slope? Okay, right. We have 2 slope. Typical 2-dimension graph, which we learned last week. So I begin from 2-sector. So same, no difference in this 45-degree. We should keep this always to find out the equilibrium. 2-sector model, we had the equation like this, 180 plus 0.9y. This is the equation. Sorry, I think it's too small for you. Aggregate expenditure 2 is 180 plus 0.9y. No big difference. Okay, so we're going to add this one to here, find out the equilibrium. So intercept 180, slope 0.9. So we can draw one aggregate expenditure like this. Okay, so equilibrium would happen here. And the equilibrium was like this. Okay, so the amount of output, amount of expenditure, same. So equilibrium. All right. Is everyone cool? Okay, so I'm making aggregate expenditure 3 here. So let me write again. Aggregate expenditure 3 is 271 plus 0.8 y. Yeah, if you want, you can say 0.81 y. So let's see. I asked you what's the meaning of this, and I think the answer means the rotation. Okay, so shall we pay attention to the intercept first? Why this one changes? Okay, so we say that because government spending increased by 100, as you see, right? So actually, this red one, right, supposed to shift up like this without changing the slope. Why? Because we have additional 100. So it should be 280. But actually, the intercept doesn't increase by 100. It just increased by 91 only. The reason is because of the tax payment, right? So aggregate expenditure 3, you can describe in this way. Starting point is 271, like this. Right, so if there's no changes in the slope, this economy should have much greater output because the equilibrium would happen here. But unluckily, in our example, this doesn't happen because the slope of the aggregate expenditure now changes from 0.9 to 0.8. So this one, AE2, the slope was 0.9. Now we have to draw one graph starting from here, but has a slope 0.8, which means flat one. So we have to draw certain amount, a certain graph look like this, Flatter, higher intercept. So we're going to draw one graph like this. And we name this AE3. And the slope of this, is 0.8. And the equilibrium happens here. And we calculate this is 1,353. Like this. Okay. So this is the showing of how the equilibrium condition changes when we have G. Positive impact make aggregate expenditure shift up. But because of the paying tax, they shift up somehow deducted paying tax. Also, making paying tax make households spend less. So the household tendency to spend should decrease. So become flat like this. Okay. And the outcome in our example is 1,355. This, as I said, this one can happen above 1,800. It depends on our calculation entirely. Okay, so let me draw new one to explain again, right? So typical 2-dimension, and let's have just 45 degree like this one. Yeah. So we have AE3, AE2, AE3, Y. And then just draw one graph which represent AE2. Right? So we are interested in what happens if we have additional G. So as I said, whenever we have G, this aggregate expenditure too must increase because we have additional G, like this, right? So you can say that this is amount of G. But what did we say? Household, firms pay tax. So this increase in G deducted by a certain amount. And this amount, you may say that this is a tax, right? But this is not all. At the same time, what happened? Slope will change. Because the slope of aggregate expenditure depends on marginal propensity to consume and tax rate. So the tax rate make this aggregate expenditure flatter, always make flatter. I will show you why it should be always flatter. Okay, so now we have up once, down again. So we have starting point here. And whether this one become flatter, how much flatter? Whether it flatter this amount, then new equilibrium happens here, right? So we can say that output increases after we having government. But if the aggregate expenditure flatten much like this due to the very high tax rate, then we're going to have new equilibrium here, Y2, which is smaller than two-sector equilibrium. So it depends on the amount of tax and then tax rate, whether this economy would produce more or less than in two-sector model. Okay, so I hope you have some clear idea about the impact of having government. So I just mentioned that why this slope aggregate expenditure in 3 always smaller than aggregate expenditure 2. I will show you. Okay. This one contains a numerical calculation. So please pay attention to this. Now, two-sector model is composed of C and I, and we write in this way. Now we call it generic form instead of a number. So it's very easy to see that this is the slope of what? Two-sector model, right? What about three-sector model? So we still have CAY, CA, IA plus G, right? But now we have to consider about this. So C, Y minus T0 minus small ty equal to CA, IA, G, right, minus C T0 plus C 1 minus T Y, like this. So we write again CA, IA, C0 minus C TO plus C 1 minus T Y. This is aggregate expenditure 3. And what is the slope of this aggregate expenditure? This one. Number in front of Y. That is the slope. Number in front of Y. That's the slope. So we have two different slope, right? On the two-sector, slope was C. Three-sector, slope turned into C bracket 1 minus T. And I said that in the three-sector model, slope is always smaller. So now you can consider why it should be. So we compare C. Right? These two. Okay, I just follow from here. So this one. Slope in the 2-sector model, slope in the 3-sector model. Which one is bigger? That's the question. It's very straightforward, right? We have same C. You can delete. Now the question is, you compare. Which one is bigger? 1 or 1 minus t? Right? Tax rate, you can easily guess, should change between 0 to 1. Tax rate 1, which means that the government will take your entire revenue as tax, right? So you can easily see that this one is always greater, right? So I said slope in aggregate expenditure 2 always greater than slope in aggregate expenditure 3. So please remember that. As a result, what should happen? In the graph which we show, aggregate expenditure in the 3-sector always flatter, right? Always flatter. Like, for example, we have aggregate expenditure 2 like this. Then the slope of aggregate expenditure 3 always flatter like this. So it always decrease national output and aggregate expenditure. That is the negative side of having government on the size of aggregate expenditure. Okay. Right. Any question up to this part? Right. So we have talked about what is the equilibrium condition in the 3rd model. What you have to remember is the government, on the one hand, have a positive impact to increase aggregate expenditure. On the other hand, has a negative impact because it collects tax. Why it has negative when it collects tax? Because paying tax make household reduced consumption, firms reduced investment purchase. Okay. So G again, positive impact, negative impact. Expenditure increase, but collecting tax. These collecting tax reduce C and I. Okay. So this is the key you have to remember. Right, so if you have no further question, I think we can continue to a couple of questions. A couple of students commented already why the small changes in that slope have a bigger impact on the national income. Yeah, so we're going to explain the concept of multiplier. Right? Multiplier effect. So multiplier is what is from the multiply, right? Multiply means that making many times bigger. So what do we call multiply? So what is multiplied by because of what? That's a key question. We especially use this multiply effect to measure the impact of fiscal policy. So actually, this one can expand to other area, but specifically we focus on government spending because we now have 3 sectors. So G, we have a G in our aggregate expenditure. So we describe in this way. What does triangle mean in economics? This one always mean change, right? So delta G means the changes in expenditure. So we saw that as we have government spending increase in our model, we see that national output increases as well, like this, right? So we see that there's some relationship between national output and government spending. So the process should be look like this. Because when the government expenditure increases, aggregate expenditure increases, equilibrium condition tells that output must increase. But briefly, we just say that government spending increase, national output increases. Say that government spending increased by 10, for example. And after calculating national equilibrium, national output increased by 50, for example. Just an example. So again, when the government spending increased by 10, we calculate the new equilibrium, and the new equilibrium output is increased by 50. Then we can calculate multiplier in this way. Output changes by 50 when the government spend changes by 10, which is 5. So this number 5 we call multiplier, size of the multiplier. The meaning is like this. Multiplier tells us that whenever the government spend certain amount of money, national income must increase by a certain amount of money. How many times it will increase, that is measured by the multiplier. So if government spend increase by 10, national output increase by 50, multiplier is 5. If it increase by 40, 30, then multiplier become smaller and smaller. Right? And we are wondering why sometimes it's 50, 40, and 30. Then I can explain using this equilibrium condition. Okay, so let me make you a bit confused. So aggregate, now it's better to write on the new paper. So I am writing an equilibrium condition in the 3-sector model. So equilibrium condition is at y equal to AE3. And AE3, we say that CA plus IA plus G bar minus CTA plus C 1 minus T Y. So as a result, equilibrium happens in this way: 1 minus C 1 minus T Y. I move this one to this side, right? CA plus IA plus G bar minus CTA. So equilibrium condition in the 3-sector, you can write in this 1 over 1 minus C 1 minus T. bracket CA IA G bar CTA, like this. So this is the equilibrium condition in 3-sector model. Small c, marginal propensity to consume. Small t, tax rate, proportional tax rate. CA, autonomous consumption. IA, autonomous investment. G, government expenditure. Small c, MPC. TA is the fixed amount of tax, right? What was my question? Question was this. We said that question was this. We said that, right, in which case government spending is 10, then in which case national output increased by 50, increased by 40, or increased by 30. So my question was, which determines the size of increase in national income? So to explain this, I showed you the equilibrium condition. Because from this equilibrium condition, we can know, we can answer. So just assume in this way, from this equilibrium condition, now assume that this government spending increased by 10, like this, increased by 10. Now we assume CA remains the same, IA remains the same, tax remains the same. So these 3 components remains the same, government spending increased by 10. Then from this relationship, you can easily find out that Y3 star must increase, right? Because right-hand side increase means left-hand side must increase. But how much this Y must increase? So this left-hand side must increase by this amount. Right? And how much is this? Let's say that this is 10. So it depends on marginal propensity to consume, tax rate, the amount of changes in national income or national output will be determined. Like as our example, we said that C is 0.9, T is 0.1. So we can calculate that, right? So it's 1 over 1 minus 0.9 multiply 0.9, which is 1 minus, right, 81. 19. So how much it should be? 1 over 0.19. 5.26. So 5 times greater impact. Oh, sorry, you didn't see this, right? Oh. So we have 10 here. What does this 10 mean? Changes in government spending. So the national income, national output should increase by 52.6. This is delta Y. This is delta G. Right? Okay, so this 5.26 we call multiplier. Okay. So whenever the government spending changes, national income must change. But how many times? How many times it will change depends on two factors. In other words, size of the multiplier depends on two factors. One factor is MPC. Second factor is tax rate. Mostly we focus on MPC. So the greater the MPC, greater the multiplier. Easy, right, to get it. The greater the tax rate, the smaller the multiplier. The reason is because people have to pay more proportionate tax. So left a smaller amount of income to spend. Greater MPC means given income, people spend more and more from the given income, greater MPC. So the multiplier must be bigger. So this is the basic concept of the multiplier. But everything is getting complicated. So we have two types of multiplier. We're going to use this one again soon, so equilibrium condition. We have two types of multiplier. One type of multiplier we just explained. So this one we call expenditure multiplier. And you can write K, E. E represent expenditure. So KE measured changes in national output divided by changes in government spending. Right? So in our example is 1 over 1 minus C, 1 minus T. Another second one called tax multiplier. Because when the government cut tax, reduce the tax, household will spend more. Or when they increase the tax, household will decrease the spending. So tax also has the same function like this. So we put this K, T, tax. And same. How much output changes when this tax changes? And how much it should be? I will show you soon. But whenever we talked about tax multiplier, don't forget to put negative sign in front, right? Negative sign. Because tax increase, people have less income, national output have negative impact, right? So tax increase, output decrease. When tax decreases, people have more national income to spend, more income to spend, so the national output increases. So these two always move to the opposite direction. That's why we need a negative sign in front. Right. So what determines the size of this? When tax changes, how much national output changes? And as I said, we're going to use the equilibrium condition. So look at this equilibrium condition again. We use this equilibrium condition to draw expenditure multiplier, but we can do the same thing. Now we are interested in the impact of this. So CA remains the same, investment remains the same, government spending remains the same, but when this tax changes, how much this national income, national output will change? How much this national output changes? So same, this proportion. But shouldn't forget MPC in front of this tax. right? So the output will change in this way. Delta Y3 would be 1 over 1 minus C, 1 minus T, multiply this minus C delta T A, like this. Okay. Someone may have a question, what is A? Fixed amount of tax, right? So it's same to T. So if you rewrite minus sign, as I said, C over 1 minus C, 1 minus T, delta T, like this. So this one we call tax multiplier, right? Because tax multiplier defined in this way. Changes in output divided by changes in tax. So this is the tax multiplier. So I'll put tax multiplier here. So the tax multiplier is minus C over 1 minus C, 1 minus T, like this. Okay, so we have two types of multiplier. And where this multiplier from? From the idea that whenever government spending changes, tax changes, national output increase more than the original amount, multiplied. How many times will be multiplied depends on the size of two things. Marginal propensity to consume, tax rate. Marginal propensity to consume, tax rate, right? So when government spending increases, these times will be multiplied. How many times? This many times. When the tax decreases, because we have negative signs, if the tax increases, national output must decrease. So when tax decreases, national output increases. So when the tax decreases, national output increase by these times. Multiplier. Any question up to this part? Yeah. I will tell you. I'm going to move that question soon. Okay. So we have this multiplier. My next question, probably related to the question Tuck just raised. My next question is, which one is greater? Whether KE greater, KT greater. So you can compare. So let me write to multiply here. My question is whether left-hand side, which is KE, right-hand side, which is KT. I just erased the negative sign in front because we are interested in the absolute amount. Which one is greater? Whether KT greater, KE greater? That is my question. This one also very easy to answer, right? Because both sides have same denominator. So this question reduces to whether one is greater or C is greater. then we know that C always changes between 0 to 1. So this is the answer, right? KE always greater than KT. Right? So, for example, government collect tax, this amount, which means that national outcome decreases. Okay? And from this tax, government spend increase certain amount, then national output increases. But this multiplier tells us that even if the government collects the same amount of tax and spend the same amount of money which it collects, the national output still increases because the multiplier effect from the expenditure always greater than the multiplier effect from tax. So one side tax collection, the other side expenditure. As a result, output likely to decrease, but at the same time, output likely to increase. Like this. So please remember that. If you have to decide whether you're going to use tax reduction or government spending to increase national output, then the theory tells that the correct answer that we have to use government spending, increase of reducing tax, because that has a higher impact on national economy. Right? Tuk, is that what you're asking? I understood your question in this way. So if you're not satisfied, you can tell me. Right, so from the first part of this topic today, we talk about this, right? Government spending always have positive sign, positive impact, negative impact. Which one would be great depends on how much expenditure increase or how much tax collection happens. To say in detail, expenditure multiplier is always greater than tax multiplier. And this multiplier is affected by size of MPC and tax rate. Okay. So these are the key things you have to remember from the first topic. Second topic is relatively easy because it's about the government budget, and the relationship to the business cycle. So we say the state budget, yeah, we define in this way: tax revenue minus government expenditure. Like this. So we usually use this one, T minus G. Yeah. At the beginning of the class, someone talking about the transfer. Right. We know that transfer is from the government. But when we use the G represent government expenditure. Expenditure for what? Expenditure for what? You say that expenditure for goods and services. So this simple transfer doesn't belong to this government spending. Government spending is exclusively means expenditure for goods and services, right? So probably some of you don't get it immediately. So I think it's good time to give an example from what happens in Ho Chi Minh City, because now we have a lot of positive cases. So you can think of that. The government do two things at the same time, as far as I know. So the government, I mean Ho Chi Minh City government, provide financial support, financial package to poor people, freelancer who doesn't have job, selling lotteries on the pavement. This is one activity they do. Second activity is that, for example, like a screening test, quarantine, hospitalize, vaccination. So we can have two different types of government activities regarding the COVID epidemic at the moment. One side, government provide money to someone who badly affected. This one we usually call transfer. Another side of activities, increasing number of tests. Keep occupying, keep securing the quarantine buildings, quarantine area, and sending people to the hospital. Prepared vaccination. So prepared vaccination, you have to purchase vaccine. You have to hire a place. You need to have a storage. Whatever, you need a huge amount of manpower, human power here. All of this, local government spend some money to purchase goods and services related to vaccination or related to anti-epidemic activities. So we have two anti-epidemic activities. One is purchasing healthcare services, goods and services. The other one is just giving money, right? So this first one, we call government transfer. We know that money is from the government, but it's not included in G we talk about here. This G exclusively refers to the activities of this. So don't confuse whenever we talk about the government spending, exclusively we talk about this, not this. The reason is very simple, because giving money to these poor people doesn't create any new value by itself unless these poor people spend money. If these poor people receive the money and don't spend, then the government transfer from the government budget to these people have no impact to the economy. In the sense, transfer doesn't create new value. But this one, purchase of goods and services, immediately create new value. You purchase vaccine, you rented a place to vaccination, purchase desk, purchase the chairs, purchase the sanitized products, whatever. Right? So that's the difference between transfer and government spending for goods and services. Create value, doesn't create value yet, unless the receivers spend the money. We know that most of them will spend the money, but this activity itself doesn't create new value. So whenever we talk about G, we exclusively talk about purchase of goods and services. So national project, national campaign, mostly, you can consider in this way, okay? No, GDP equation, we don't consider that because that is not part of newly created value. Okay, and then now let's talk about this. So we have budget. So budget revenue minus spending. So if this situation happen, equal budget surplus, and this situation happen, equal budget deficit. Right? So many countries they want to have balanced. I think I read a news article a few days ago. The Vietnamese government have decided to for the next 5 years the government budget, government deficit cannot be greater than 60% of GDP for the next 5 years. So each country they have such kind of condition because they want to keep the balance. When they have too much deficit, which means they have to borrow the money from financial market. So borrowing, when the government borrow money, what kind of problem can you expect? When the government borrow the money, government anyway has to pay back what they borrowed today in 5 years time, 10 years time, 20 years time. Then what does it mean? The government postpone its payment to the next generation, right? To the next generation. No, this one is not. It doesn't have direct relationship to the multiply effect, Guang. So postpone to the next generation. What does this mean? What does this mean? Means that when you borrow money today, the payment happen in 10 years, 20 years later on, which means that the debt that you make today will be paid by your sons and daughters, not by yourself. Okay. Yeah, whom you're correct. And also must have a higher tax rate later on to fund this borrowing. Okay. So the point is that all countries, they want to make the balance, either too much wants to avoid either both case, too much surplus, too much deficit. They want to avoid these cases. So what I want to say is that how this budget status related to the business cycle. So we say that budget business cycle. So we have two business cycles, recession and expansion. So try to think, during the recession, we have T, tax revenue, and government spending. Then during the recession, what would happen to this amount? Because this one is tax revenue. And we just say that tax revenue has close relationship to the national income. Recession, we defined recession is decrease in output. So when national output decreases, total amount of tax collection likely to decrease, right? So during the recession, even if the government spending remains the same, budget likely to record deficit, right? So no one can blame a government that why don't you keep the budget balanced? It's because this budget balance is not only depends on government spending, but also this business cycle. What about expansionary? Same logic, yeah. We define expansionary means national output increases. So TY likely to increase because T increases. So this one likely to increase. So without doing anything, government budget likely to record surplus. So automatically requesting to the government that you always have to follow the balanced budget, then it's not reasonable, because budget is affected by the government spending, but also largely affected by tax revenue. And this tax revenue is largely affected by business cycle, because government cannot increase tax, decrease tax rate so radical way, right? So this is the one perspective that if someone requests the Vietnamese government, you have to maintain your budget balanced always. Then we can answer back in this way. Hey, I want to maintain the balance, but that one not only depends on how much I spend, that depends on how much I collect, which I cannot control by myself, because how much I collect depends on the business cycle. Who knows that what business cycle comes next, right? So it's unpredictable in this way and has some relationship. Okay. And this one also depends on how much the government spent, right? So during the recessionary, government spend likely to more. During the expansion, government likely to spend less. So actually this situation getting more serious. So please remember that even though keeping the balanced budget is important, because too much national debt always has a negative impact to the future generation, but keeping the balance is not entirely the matter of government spending. It's not the entire matter of government spending, but also largely depends on tax revenue. And tax revenue depends on business cycle of a country. So we have some complicated relationship between keeping budget balanced and business cycle. Okay, so we all finished the 3-sector model, and then let me have a brief explanation about net export. So net export is export minus import, like this. Oh. Wrong? No, it's not that straightforward like that. We have to consider so many other factors. You cannot simply say that budget deficit make the price cheaper, because we have to consider about the impact on exchange rate, interest rate. There's so many factors we have to consider. So there's no straightforward answer without additional information about the economy. So currency can be weaker, yeah, when the government has deficit. Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So when we have a net export like this, so aggregate expenditure now for sector C plus I plus G, and then we have X minus M. So this one tells us in this way: aggregate expenditure of the economy of an economy will increase when Vietnam export more and more, right? Because we have positive sign. So to increase aggregate expenditure, as a result, wants to increase the national output, Vietnam is supposed to export more and more. That's what your government relies on, your economy is relying on at the moment. But at the same time, we have negative sign. The more amount Vietnamese import from foreign countries, aggregate expenditure decreases. So this national output also decreases. So to promote economic growth depends on two things. If we consider the external sector, either making more export or reduce import. As a result, aggregate expenditure in the fourth sector have a positive impact, and then national output increases in this way. And this export and the import depends on three factors: price, exchange rate, and price, exchange rate, and income. Income. Right. Which one is important then? Income is really important because foreigners get richer, they will purchase more foreign goods, which means Vietnamese have higher probability to sell its product. So the foreign income is really important to increase the export of Vietnam. Also, the richer the Vietnamese, they're likely to purchase more imported products. So this income positively affect export, and this income, national income, also affect negatively. Right? Richer the foreigner, greater the amount of export. Richer the domestic people, the greater the amount of import. Okay, so we have such a relationship. And prices and exchange rate also make Vietnamese goods more expensive or cheaper, depends on the exchange rate. Okay, please remember the income is one of the most important factors. Okay. Right, so foreign sector is not a big, is not our main focus in this subject. So I'm not going to have it deeper. So you can study about the external sector in international trade and international monetary economics. Right. So yeah. So we finished. We covered sector 3 mainly today by adding government and how the tax changes the household the spending and the multiplier effect and the relationship to the budget and the business cycle. All right. So I think I can finish. Any other question? Yeah.